Welcome back to Political Decency Podcast. This is episode 2, January 7th, 2025. As MAGA begins their reign of terror on the United States government in 2 weeks, we can look to the past to see how the worst leaders treat their own. On October 14, 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, 52 years old, had a conversation with his 15-year-old son, Manfred Rommel. Manfred recounts how the conversation went. He, Erwin, was standing in the middle of his mother's room with a pale face. "Come outside with me," he told me with a tense voice. We went into my room. "I just had to tell your mother that in a quarter of an hour I will be dead." He then calmly continued, "It is hard to be killed by your own people, but the house is surrounded, and Hitler is accusing me of treason. Taking into consideration the period I served in Africa, they will give me the chance to go on the other side by poisoning. The 2 generals brought poison with them. It is fatal in 3 seconds. If I accept this, the usual measures will not be taken against my family. That is against you. Also, they will leave my staff alone." This had to be a surreal conversation for Manfred. After all, Erwin was a highly decorated general in the German army. Erwin was a confidant of Adolf Hitler, and the Rommel family lived in luxury while they were in the inner circle of the Nazi regime. But by October 1944, well, actually, according to Manfred, at the start of 1943, Erwin's trust in Germany's ability to win the initiated conflict began to crumble as days went by, and so did his faith in Hitler. Traveling in Germany, Rommel was outraged by the devastation caused by Allied air raids, and the eroded public morale was not a good sign for him. Erwin also found out about the concentration camps, the forced labor, the extermination of the Jews, and other atrocities committed by the regime that he was serving. Gradually, Erwin reached the conclusion that the German victory was a lost cause, and that the extension of this war would only do more damage to Germany. The field marshal came into contact with members of a group who planned to overthrow Hitler and negotiate a separate peace with the Allies. Rommel did not agree with the assassination of Hitler, believing that such a gesture would transform the Führer into a martyr. He believed that arresting Hitler and placing him under trial would be the best solution. This story about Rommel gives us an insight into the mental instability of Hitler, who has narcissistic and mental traits very similar to Donald Trump. When Hitler failed and German military members carried out an assassination attempt, Hitler lashed out at every single person who could possibly be involved, whether they were innocent or not. When Trump failed to win the election in 2020, he lashed out by causing an insurrection and encouraged the attack on the U.S. Capitol. What makes us think anything will be different this time around? What makes us think that this will end any differently for the people within the Trump MAGA inner circle than it did for the people who were within the Hitler Nazi inner circle? That's why we need to become active in the Democratic Party, to resist as much as we can, resist the agenda being put into place by Trump and his cult. It's time to shake off the doldrums and get involved. Start working on the next election by attending meetings, do canvassing and phone banking, and joining a passive resistance group to coordinate and push back on the lies, the misinformation, and the disgusting rhetoric. Realize now that apathy and surrender will not save you from the perceived doom that you are convincing yourself there is no hope. As President Franklin Roosevelt said in his inaugural speech March 4, 1933, during a colossal banking crisis when nearly 11,000 of the nation's banks were in trouble and 24,000 banks had already failed, wiping out the hard-earned savings of millions of Americans, and the unemployment rate had soared to an epic 25%. I am certain that my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impel. This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. So, folks, let's take the advice of President Franklin Roosevelt. Let us also take the advice of President Roosevelt's friend, Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Never give in, never give in, never, never, never. Never in nothing, great or small, large or petty. Never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force. Never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. Do not let us speak of darker days. Let us speak rather of sterner days. These are not dark days. These are great days, the greatest days our country has ever lived. And we must all thank God that we have been allowed, each of us according to our stations, to play a part in making these days memorable in our history. We thank you for taking the time to listen to our Political Decency Project podcast. If you appreciate our work, please like, subscribe, and click on receiving notifications when new content is released. Never stop resisting MAGA Nazis and fight on for our democracy. This episode of Political Decency Project podcast is brought to you by VeteransAgainstFascism.com. VAF is a group of veterans whose mission is to defeat fascism and fascist politicians in the United States of America. Email them at info@veteransagainstfascism.com. Help us in our mission. Donate today by going to VeteransAgainstFascism.com. Support US.